Why didn't it, oh. How do you take two characters' motivations that are fundamentally the same and make them feel worlds apart? Depth from character writing can often stem from something as simple as the way a character perceives themselves. Small changes in fundamental parts of a character can cascade into influencing everything in the way they're written. So when two characters are doing their best to stand up to an overwhelming and destructive force, how can one man see himself as a monster while the other embraces himself as a hero? Welcome to Season 2 of Exploring Frieren. My name is Pei, and today we're talking about when motivation and identity collide. Last week I argued that good character writing is at the foundation of all of my favorite stories. Good characters can carry uninteresting plot or settings. Literally, one good character can be enough to keep you invested in a series you would have dropped otherwise. And I love when good character writing extends beyond the main cast. A prime example of that is Frieren Beyond Journey's End. The focus of today's video is comparing a side character I never in a million years would have guessed would come back to be as important as he is, with a character that we lost in the very first episode. Frieren has the potential of getting an amazing story out of literally any character they introduce. So how do they get away with it? Well, today we're going to look at the intersection of two major components of the way characters are written. The first is motive, which is considered to be the bread and butter of any character writing. What motivates a character ultimately determines why and how they're engaging with the plot. It shapes their character arc and whether or not audiences can empathize with the character and become emotionally invested. I'm arguing today that these two characters' motivations at the core are the same, but they're voiced very differently. And that's determined by the second part of character writing we're focusing on today, self-perception. How a character sees themselves is a great place to focus on when you're trying to flesh out depth. Stark, one of the main trio from Frieren, is another great example of a character who measures his self-perception against his motives. How those two interact brings a lot out in the character, but instead I chose two that felt like flip sides of the same coin. And to understand and explore them, I have to give a soft spoiler warning. Be warned, we're going to be exploring through episode 7 of Frieren's second season. There's always something fascinating about building a character in a story around memories rather than their actual participation. Himmel from Frieren Beyond Journey's End is a fundamental part of this story, but also was lost in the very first episode. However, the way the story is structured, Frieren slowly recontextualizing her previous journey against a new one, allows for discoveries constantly through recounting of memory. Flashbacks are a fundamental part of this story's telling. While Himmel is a fundamental character to the story, he was rarely given, because of the nature of flashbacks, perspective. The exact opposite and comparison for this video is Genau, a tertiary character who's been given the lead, the main point of view perspective character for the last 2 episodes and the coming one, so season 2, episodes 6, 7, and 8. He's the emotional staple and foundation, a step away from the primary cast. Last week's video was actually built around that concept, and he's been used to great effect. And what's so fascinating about these characters is how similar their motives are at their root. To fight the seemingly endless destructive force that is demons, to provide safety and sanctity to the innocent who have to face that desolation. However, with such similar motivation, these two characters couldn't be more different. And I think that specifically starts with self-perception. A major component of Himmel's character writing is how they play with vanity, confidence, and self-awareness, and then they tie it into a larger exploration of what it means to be a hero. I've talked about this in detail in the past and probably will again in the future, but the shorthand is that Himmel believes in himself. The confidence to take on the Demon King with a replica sword, without a prophecy or being the chosen one, indicates that self-belief, and it heavily influences the lens in which he sees his motivation. Fighting this chaotic force means being a hero and helping others. Genau, however, sees himself in a completely opposite light. He is burdened by the responsibility of making decisions that are tough, making hard choices that he believes to be immoral to fight the greater evil. Season 2, episode 7 starts with a monologue of Genau talking about his former partner, a good person who died sacrificing himself for a child. But what good is sacrifice for an individual if you can't save thousands of people following that? So he sees his motivation, despite being almost fundamentally the same as Himmel's, as a tool meant to fight destruction, a sacrificial lamb who will live a hard life for the greater good. The ability to make these two very similar characters feel so drastically different, explored primarily through the lens of how they see themselves, is part of what makes, I think, very diverse and clever character writing, instead of going wider, finding depth in things that have already been established. There's almost a beautiful irony in the fact that despite how important Himmel is to the story, with the exception of the first episode of the first season, the audience always experiences him through the lens of Friren's memories. Part of the beauty of Himmel's character is how he's someone that we observe from the outside, discovering a lot about the depth the character offers throughout these 2 seasons through little pieces of information that slowly paint a fuller image. Like mosaic glass that is shattered, we're slowly finding and putting together little pieces. So then to take a character like Genau, who ultimately has very little importance in the grand arc of this story, and give him so much perspective for this specific conflict, I think there's something fantastic about how well that works. Genau is such a burdened character. But then again, most characters in Frieren are. Himmel and Hyder grew up in an orphanage together. Friren's town was destroyed when she was young. Fern is a war orphan, and Stark can't forgive himself for abandoning his family during a time of need. This circumstance for all these different characters to react to is fascinating. I think one of Himmel's most admirable character traits is his optimism. It's not something that should be expected of people who've experienced tragedy. However, it is incredibly powerful. Throughout Frieren, there are multiple moments where Himmel had to sit with the incredible weight of what he was trying to do. Everything from the hero of the South's sacrifice to mistakes he made that resulted in more death. And that actually represents a major component of what I love about Frieren. It's willing to explore darker and heavier topics while still maintaining an overall optimistic tone. A story that poses interesting questions and explores them beautifully. Something that's happened throughout this mini arc that I think is really beautiful is specifically the dynamic between Genau and Stark. Genau is obviously facing deep emotional turmoil, trying and in some cases failing to use his cold logic as a coping mechanism. And I love how when Genau makes a risky decision to stay and protect the bodies of the dead, Stark refuses to let him make it alone. This entire season has been filled with these little running bits around fish and bread that are now being used as emotional exclamation points for this specific arc. I think Stark is showing an emotional intelligence that we've seen throughout the entire series involving understanding others. He is also, like Genau, a character deeply burdened by decisions he had to make. Someone very critical of himself, that still kind of embodies that optimism, even maybe from a place of ignorance that Himmel had. All of this expression of self-belief and perception also ties into this running narrative of how each character in the story is influenced by their masters. Frieren with Flamma, Fern with Hyder, Stark with Eisen, Zeria and Genau. They have baggage and skills as a result of those relationships. The way characters perceive themselves is a beautiful mix of their personalities, their environment, those who influence them, the circumstance they find themselves in. There's so much in these last couple episodes to chew on. It's just a fascinating example of good character writing, which kind of touches on this bigger idea that good characters, as much as we can point at individual components that make them strong, are also kind of built around this X factor. The accumulation of tons of tiny decisions that make a crafted individual in a story feel more real. Tons of storytelling is formulaic and referential. It's something that's been done before, with a new element implemented to make it feel unique. Because the right question at the right time can actually have a cascading effect on every other component of the story or a character. Like if you want 2 different people with similar motivations to feel starkly apart, maybe you can start first with considering how they see themselves, because that ends up tying into much bigger parts about who they are as a character. Thanks for watching. If you liked this video, consider going and checking out the others I've done in the series so far, or the 7-hour supercut I did on Frieren Season 1. I'll catch y'all next week.